Hello, today we're going to be starting to talk about the Iliad, the long epic poem by Homer, and I'm going to let other people do most of the introduction. But I do want to say a few things. The Iliad is set during the Trojan War, about 1200 BC or so, is the date I want you to remember in connection with Homer's Iliad. It's an approximate date. We're not sure exactly when the Trojan War was. In fact, archaeology at Troy has discovered that the city was destroyed several times in the 11 and 1200s. But Troy was located in what is today Turkey before the Turks got there from Central Asia. And the Trojan War is, as the Greeks came to remember their history, the first big event. And Homer's Iliad is only one of many poems about that war. But Homer's Iliad was the most important. In fact, it was the book that was used to teach Greek boys how to read. They didn't have C spot, run. I am a puppy. My name is Bruno. I am a beagle. Big A, little A, and Annie's alligator, A. The last two were books that my kids liked to have me read to them when they were little, and I can still remember the books because kids like you to read the same stories over and over and over and over. And if you have kids, or when you have kids, read to them. It's the most important thing you can do to turn them into readers. People who will read on their own and who like to read and who read well. A lot of our students, unfortunately, don't come from that kind of background, and as a consequence, don't read at grade level. And that's a challenge. So do your kids a favor and read to them. Because Greek boys learn to read using Homer's Iliad, that basically meant that everybody who could read had read the Iliad and was influenced by its attitudes, its stories, because that's what they grew up on. It's much like the role that the Bible had in colonial America. Now, I said Greek boys were taught to read using the Iliad. Some of you may wonder, well, what about Greek girls? Well, the answer, unfortunately, is that the ancient Greeks often didn't teach their daughters to read the same way they did their sons. Daughters were taught to cook and to sew and to weave. And then, of course, the Greek men turned around and complained that the women were not their intellectual equals. With a few exceptions, Plato being one, it never seems to have occurred to them that maybe, just maybe, if you systematically deny one segment of your society a quality education, that maybe that's why they come off looking unintelligent. Maybe they might have had the intelligence, but they never had the opportunity to develop it through education. By the way, the same argument was used to put down African Americans in American history. You don't educate them, and sure enough, they don't seem to be as bright. Well, maybe if they got a better education, that achievement gap would disappear. And frankly, I think we're still dealing with that, because in America today, if you come from a low-income area, generally the schools that you go to are not as good as the schools that more affluent young people attend, and you don't get as good an education, and so you're behind. Maybe if we had a better educational system, we would see higher levels of achievement from all segments of society. Every society has its blind spots, the flaws that are perfectly obvious to people on the outside, but which people on the inside have a hard time seeing. It took the United States almost 100 years to see the contradiction between the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the existence of slavery. I guarantee you that every slave who heard a public reading of the Declaration of Independence saw the contradiction immediately. But we had to fight a rather bloody war to get that seen. As the story opens, the Greeks are camped on the beach at Troy. And that in itself points out something very important. Although the Iliad is set during the Trojan War, it's not actually about the war. It's about the people who are caught up in the war and their efforts to make their lives have some meaning, some value, some purpose, and how they go about trying to do that. And I think that makes this much more important. After all, if it was about a war that happened 3,000 years ago, while there are people that read books of ancient history because they're interested in it, I happen to be one of them, you could easily say, well, what's that got to do with me? Why should I care? By being about the characters, the people, and about what I believe is a universal human need, the need to believe that in some way our lives matter, that our life has meaning and value and purpose. Will you buy that that's something everybody needs to have? It's my observation that if people come to believe for an extended period of time that their life has no meaning, no value, they have a tendency to end it. And I think the ways that these characters go about trying to give their lives meaning and value shows ways that people still go about trying to give their lives meaning and value. The Iliad starts 9 years into a 10-year-long war. If you're writing about the war, that's not where you start. And the Iliad does not tell about the end of the war. The story of the Trojan horse and all that comes to us from other epic poems in the Trojan War cycle. And I'll let some of the other videos introduce you to some of those. The Greeks are on the beach and they are suffering a plague of disease, so that Greeks are dying. And Homer actually starts off with this plague and what's causing it. The Greeks had attacked not Troy first, but Troy's allies first, kind of picking off the weak links before you take on the most difficult challenge. And one of the cities they had taken was a place called Chryse, and a priest there, Chryses, his daughter Chryseis had been taken captive. You know, the whole point of warfare in the ancient world was to get stuff. And when they took a city, all the loot, all the plunder was divided up. The wealth, the livestock, and yes, the women. And this priest's daughter, and if you happen to be Catholic and the idea of a priest having a daughter sounds strange to you, you need to understand that it's only in some forms of Christianity and Buddhism that priests are expected to remain celibate, never marry, never have a family. In the ancient world, priests married and had kids just like everybody else. But he tries to ransom his daughter back, basically buy her back from Agamemnon. But Agamemnon refuses, insults the priest, even threatens him, and the priest then prays to Apollo, asking Apollo to send this plague on the Greeks. After all, if you disrespect the priest, you are ultimately disrespecting the God whom the priest serves. And so the Greeks start dying. First the mules, and then the swift hounds, then loosed his vicious darts at the men. In the ancient world, illness was widely assumed to be caused by the fact that God or one of the gods was angry with you and was punishing you for some slight, some insult. Well, the Greeks call an assembly, and Calchas, their prophet, is called on to say what is up with that. And in Book 1, lines 53 to 100, he says it's not for a broken vow or a missed sacrifice that Apollo blames us, but because of that priest whom Agamemnon offended, refusing the ransom, refusing to free his daughter. That's why the God, the far striker, makes us suffer, and will do so, and will not rid the Danaans, another word for Greeks, of a loathsome plague until we return the bright-eyed girl to her father without recompense or ransom, and send a sacred offering to Chryse. Then we might persuade him to relent. So they've got to give the girl back without Agamemnon getting anything in return. You know, sometimes it's easier to work things out before everybody gets all mad and worked up. After that happens, it's harder to work out a solution, and that's what's happened here. And when Calchas sits down, Book 1, lines 101 to 147, Agamemnon gets up in anger, his mind filled with blind rage. His eyes blazed like fire. First he rounded on Calchas with a threatening look. Baneful prophet, your utterance has never yet favored me. You only ever love to augur evil. Never a word of good is spoken or fulfilled. You never have anything good to say about me. Sounds like Trump in the media. At least in Trump's eyes. And now you prophesied to the Danaan assembly, claiming the far striker troubles them because I refused fine ransom for a girl, Chryse's daughter, and would rather take her home. Well, I prefer her to my wife Clytemnestra, since she's no less than her in form or stature, mind or skill. Wow, what a thing to say. See, what's important about these speeches is that they give us insight into the characters. The kind of person Agamemnon is. He values other people solely in terms of what they have to offer him. Agamemnon is one of those people who only cares about one thing in this world, and that is himself. He is the ultimate selfish son of a biscuit eater. Wonder what Clytemnestra would have to say if she'd heard him say this. Dead man walking. Yet even so, I'd look to give her up if that seems best. I'd rather you were safe and free of plague. I don't want to, but I'll give her up if that's what's best for the army. But, important condition, so ready a prize at once for me. I'll not be the only one with empty hands. That would be wrong. I'm not going to be the only one with nothing to show for that battle. See, for Agamemnon, the question is always what's going to pay off for him. You see for yourselves, my prize now goes elsewhere. Well, Achilles gets up and points out to greedy Agamemnon that the Greeks don't have a spare prize closet. That when they capture a city, they divide up the goods, and so the only way to get another prize to replace Chryseis would be to take a prize away from somebody else. And so he says, give up the girl as the god demands, and we Achaeans will compensate you 3 or 4 times over if Zeus ever lets us sack high-wall Troy. Taking a prize away from somebody else doesn't solve the problem, it just moves it to another person. So he suggests what we call deferred gratification. You'll get your reward later on. When we take Troy, you can have 3 or 4 prizes. We'll make it up to you then. Agamemnon will have none of that. Brave you may be, godlike Achilles, but don't try to trick me with your cleverness. You'll not outwit or cajole me. Do you think, since you demand I return her, that I'll sit here with a prize while you keep yours? When hell freezes over, right? Let the great-hearted Achaeans find a prize, one that's to my taste, so the exchange is equal. He is not going to be left with the short end of the stick, not even for a little while. If not, then I myself will take yours, or seize and keep that of Ajax or Odysseus, and whoever it is, he'll be angered. Are you getting an insight into what motivates Agamemnon? How he tries to give his life meaning and value? Well, this only ticks Achilles off even more. Why, you shameless schemer, should any Achaean leap to obey your orders to march or wage war? No quarrel with the Trojan spearmen brought me here to fight. They've done me no wrong. No horse or cow of mine have they stolen, nor have my crops been ravaged in deep-soiled Phthia, his homeland in Greece. No, it's for your pleasure, you shameless cur. A cur is a mutt. We followed to try and win recompense for you and Menelaus from the Trojans, and now you neither see or care. I'll let other videos tell you about the background and the fight over Helen. I happen to think that's more of an excuse than a reason for the Trojan War. The real reason has to do with trade and wealth and power. Probably the purpose of the Trojan War, or maybe wars, was to capture wealth. The area around Troy was noted for breeding first-class horses, which were used not only for warfare but as the machines of farming. The only power there was really was muscle power, human or animal, and capturing slaves. I think the famous story about Helen was at best an excuse. When the Achaeans sack some rich Trojan city, it's not I who win the prize. My hands bear the brunt of the fiercest fight. But when the wealth is shared, yours is the greater share, while I, weary with battle, return to the ships with some small fraction for my own. See, Achilles has a different motivation. He is the best of the Greek warriors. All of the Greek heroes in the Iliad are kings of their own cities. Agamemnon is the highest ranking of them. But Achilles is the greatest fighter, and he knows it. And he thinks that entitles him not so much to wealth, but to recognition. And if he's not going to get that, then he's going to go home to Phthia. And Agamemnon basically tells him, go on home. Don't let the door hit you where God split you. But I'm going to come and take Briseis, your prize, away from you so that you will know that you are not my equal. Basically, Achilles is doing what a professional athlete does when they hold out for a better contract. I don't think athletes do that for the money in and of itself. Frankly, any professional athlete at the highest level, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, you're making pretty good money. They want recognition. They think they're the best at the position that they play, and really what they're doing is they're gambling that the team won't be able to win without them. And so the team will have to recognize them with a contract that shows that they are the best at their position. I think it's about that recognition rather than the wealth itself. Book 1, lines 188 to 222, Athena appears as Achilles is contemplating whether to draw his sword and kill Agamemnon. One translation says, gut him like a fish, or restrain himself to just telling him off. And Athena appears to him, and notice that Achilles is the only one who can see her. And advises him to get back at him a different way. Don't kill him, just tell him off. Now, there's two ways you can read the gods in Homer's Iliad. You can read them as at literal face value, in which case what happens here is that Athena, goddess of wisdom, comes and talks Achilles out of following his instinct to kill Agamemnon by persuading him that he'll get more by using a different strategy. But you can also read the gods in Homer's Iliad as personifications or metaphors for the forces, the psychological forces that drive human action. And so if you read this that way, then what's happening is that Achilles, part of him wants to kill Agamemnon, but he thinks better of it. Have you ever had the experience of your emotions wanting to do one thing and your mind tells you, no, I better not do that, I better do something else instead? Maybe that's what's going on here. And so Achilles tells Agamemnon off and warns him that you will feel a gnawing pang of remorse for failing to honor the best of the Achaeans. Well, sure enough, Book 1, lines 318 to 356, Agamemnon does take Achilles' prize, Briseis, but he doesn't come himself. People like Agamemnon generally get somebody else to do their dirty work for them. And that's exactly what happens here. But look at Achilles' response when the heralds come. He doesn't get upset with them. He knows who's behind this. And he tells his friend and perhaps relative Patroclus to bring out the girl and hand her to Agamemnon's messengers. And Patroclus does, but Homer points out that she is unwilling. In some translations, she is loath to go with them. In the Iliad, the emphasis is always on the men. They're the prime actors. It was a male-dominated society, no question about that. But I think it's interesting to think about how the women feel about things. And I think Homer actually invites us to think about that because he says she is unwilling. Now let's be honest. Briseis at this point is a slave. She has no say in whether she belongs to Achilles or to Agamemnon. But yet Homer says she's unwilling to go to Agamemnon. And I think that invites us to wonder why. Is it that being transferred this way just emphasizes her powerlessness? Or has she been with the Greeks long enough to have heard about Agamemnon and the kind of son of a biscuit eater that he is, and she doesn't want to be around him? Or is it possible that there is some kind of bond that is formed between her and Achilles? I like to watch Henry Louis Gates TV shows. He had one called African American Lives, which he traced the ancestry of prominent African Americans. He has one now called Finding Your Roots on PBS. And I like those kind of shows because they kind of personalize history. They look at history not through the big picture of the big events, but through how they impact individuals' lives. And he had one episode where he profiled Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, who recently passed away, and discovered that the congressman's, I think it was great-grandmother, Elizabeth, they called her Betts for short, had sure enough been a slave on a plantation in North Alabama, where he was from. But there was a story they uncovered where when the Union Army came through, Betts stood in the doorway to the big house with an axe, daring any Yankee to set foot in the house. And none of them did because they didn't want to deal with that axe. Well, in following up that story, they looked at the 1870 census, the first one where African Americans appear as actual people instead of as property. And they discovered Betts and her husband were in that census. And not only were they in the census and registered to vote, by the way, because that was a big part of what John Lewis was about, was securing the vote for African Americans. And by the way, make sure that you're registered to vote either here or back home. And come election day, get your hindquarters to the polls. Or make arrangements to vote absentee ballot back home. Your ancestors suffered a great deal to get you that right. And how dare you not exercise it? But not only were they registered to vote, they actually showed up in the census as landowners. See, not only had they been freed, as, let's face it, their owner had no choice about that. The outcome of the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation and the passage of the amendment that ended slavery left no choice about that. But their former owner, had also done something that he didn't have to do. He gave them a piece of land, part of what had been his plantation. Now that looks to me like there was some kind of human relationship there. Maybe that was a thank you for Betts protecting his house. At the very least, it says, as Congressman Lewis pointed out, that no matter how dehumanizing the social structure might be, these are in fact human beings, and human beings who are who are together for extended periods of time, interacting with one another, and I don't necessarily mean just sexually, but in terms of a personal relationship, that you in fact develop some kind of human bond, friendship between you, even when the social structure says that one person isn't fully human. That seems to be what happened there, and it may be what happens between Achilles and Briseis. Achilles grieves, angered by this insult. And his mother Thetis comes to comfort him. In Homer's Iliad, a lot of the major characters are children of a god or goddess. And what I think that is about really is it's a way of explaining why it is that some people are bigger, stronger, faster, uh, smarter, more talented in one way or another, better looking than others. Well, the explanation is that they're not just human. There's a god or a goddess in the family tree somewhere. Thetis is a minor goddess, and she comes to comfort him, and he asks her um, to go to Zeus and remind Zeus that he owes her a favor because uh, she rescued him when he was in trouble and in fact saved his life. And he wants his mother to go and remind Zeus of that and ask Zeus to help the Trojans defeat the Greeks. See, if the Greeks can win without Achilles, then they won't be forced to give him the respect that he thinks he deserves. Well, we get a story about where how the Greeks go about returning the girl and the offerings that they make. And then Book 1, lines 48 to 530, Thetis goes to Zeus and asks that favor, and Zeus is reluctant. This is a sorry business indeed, and you will force a quarrel with Hera. She will taunt me and rile me. As it is, she scolds me endlessly before the other gods, claiming I aid the Trojans in battle. Now, let's think about this for a minute. First of all, we're reading an epic poem composed by Greeks for a Greek audience. And in it, the king of the Greek gods favors the Trojans. God is against us. Wow. Hera, on the other hand, favors the Greeks. And so this is a cause of quarrel between them. And this is worse than a Grambling grad married to a Southern grad going to the Bayou Classic. And if you think that doesn't happen, think again. And he knows that if he grants this request, there's going to be hell to pay. But he owes her a favor. And it suits his desires anyway. And so he grants it. And sure enough, Book 1, lines 531 to 567, as soon as Thetis leaves, Hera lights into him. What immortal has sought your counsel, arch deceiver? You lying so-and-so. It's ever your delight to work behind my back and make all your decisions in secret. When did you ever openly discuss your plans with me? Hera, replied the father of gods and men, do not expect to know all my thoughts. Though you are my wife, you would find it a burden with that little one-celled brain of yours. Zeus and Hera don't get along so well, do they? Whatever's right to hear, for you to hear, no more immortal, no human shall know before you. But of what I plan without reference to the other gods, make no question, do not ask. It's none of your damn business. And I think you have to read Hera's response with a touch of sarcasm. Dread son of Kronos, what is this? What are you talking about? I never question you or ask. You can always think and do whatever you please. But then, of course, she knows exactly what this is about and tells him. Guys, the ladies are far better at reading us than we are at reading them. You think she doesn't know what you're up to. She does. And no man ever really won an argument with his wife. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And Zeus responds in anger. You're obsessed, forever brooding. I can hide nothing from you, yet you'll achieve nothing to only estrange us, and so much the worse for you. If things are as you think, then isn't it because I want them that way? Now sit there quiet and obey me, lest I set my all-powerful hands on you, and all the gods of Olympus lack the strength to save you. The Greek gods are not moral examples. In fact, the word holy in ancient languages, hagios in ancient Greece, hagia in modern Greek, kodesh in Hebrew, really isn't about morality. The root meaning is the idea of being set apart from everyday use, everyday life, being something completely different. And the Greek gods are frequently immoral in their behavior. They differ from human beings in being all-powerful and immortal. They never die. But they act very much like people. And I suspect that you probably have known a dysfunctional couple like Zeus and Hera. I think about a sister-in-law and brother-in-law, one of my wife's sisters and her husband, that were decent enough people. I mean, it's not that I disliked them, but I always hated to go over to their house because they were like Zeus and Hera. They were always fighting. You never knew when some little thing might set off World War III. And I'm not a big fan of drama. In fact, they divorced and then turned around and remarried each other. You know, you've heard the expression, can't live with them, can't live without them. Well, they were the example of that. And that's what I think of with this scene of Zeus and Hera and all their fussing and fighting with each other. We then get this interesting scene where Book 3, lines 1 to 57, Paris and Menelaus, where Paris appears wearing a panther's skin, a leopard's skin. Now, I don't know about you, but if I've got to go fight a battle with swords and spears, I want metal armor, not a leopard skin. Paris is not dressed to fight. He is dressed to be seen. This is a show. And if you notice, he's got a bow slung over his shoulders. Most of the warriors in Homer's Iliad fight with spear and sword. Paris's preferred weapon when he does fight is bow and arrow because you can fight from a distance. It's safer. See, Paris is the ultimate make love, not war guy. But his brother Hector goads him into challenging Menelaus to fight one-on-one. And Menelaus, of course, jumps at the chance because he wants the chance to get his revenge on this so and so that ran off with Menelaus's wife. Paris reminds um, Hector that it's not his fault if he enjoys the gifts of Aphrodite, goddess of love, but he is eventually persuaded to go and fight Menelaus. Book 3, lines 310 to 394. When they fight, Menelaus is far bigger and stronger than Paris, and grabs him by the helmet which had a big horsehair crest on top, running, by the way, not fore and aft, front to back like you see in the movies, but running from side to side. The whole point was to make you look bigger than you were, more intimidating. And Menelaus grabs him by that crest and is kind of swinging him around. And Aphrodite breaks the chin strap so that Paris goes cartwheeling away, and Menelaus is left just holding this empty helmet, which he throws down and comes after Paris. But Aphrodite cloaked Paris in mist, and with a goddess's power whisked him away and set him down in his own high, sweet-scented room while she sped off to summon Helen. If we demythologize this a little bit, that cloud of mist is a cloud of dust kicked up by Paris's running feet as he decides that discretion is the better part of valor, that he who fights and runs away lives to love another day. Getting an idea of how Paris goes about trying to give his life meaning and value. And you can read that, by the way, two ways. Are there people who look to love and family to give their lives meaning and value? Or you can look at it a different way, that it's not so much love as it is sex that Paris looks to. And ladies, I'll let you decide whether there are still guys who seem to define their goal in life as how many beds they can get into. We then, book 6, get the scene between Glaucus and Diomedes, who meet each other on the battlefield, and they want to know who the other one is. Now, my father-in-law fought in World War II, and I don't think he ever called over to the German lines asking, what's your name? See, warfare in Homer's Iliad isn't mass armies against each other. It is a series of one-on-one conflicts between individual warriors. And the goal of these is to win glory. And because the purpose is to win glory, you want to know who you're fighting. Because you want to fight somebody of roughly equal status with yourself. You know, there's a reason that we don't load up our schedule with the other Tigers from Louisiana, and the Crimson Tide, and the Clemson Tigers, and the Georgia Bulldogs, and the likes of those. They're bigger schools and they have more scholarships. So they have greater depth. We've got some good players, but they have more good players. I don't like our chances of winning too often. And you don't want to fight somebody in one of these battles who's a lot better than you are, because you're going to get killed, literally. But on the other hand, you also don't want to fight somebody who is of a lot lower status than yourself. I mean, why don't we play Ruston Junior High? Well, the answer is that because nobody would be impressed no matter how bad we beat them. And by the way, I happen to know that the record for most lopsided college football game ever is Georgia Tech 222, Cumberland College 0. The game was played a century ago. Georgia Tech was one of the dominant powers in college football at that time. In fact, their coach was a guy named John Heisman. You may have heard of his name. There's a trophy named after him. Okay. And Cumberland College's team was basically a fraternity team. Nobody's going to be impressed no matter how bad you beat them. You should beat the stuffing out of them. It's men against boys, right? So you don't want to fight somebody who's a lot lower than status than you are, because you're not going to gain any respect, any glory from fighting that battle either. You only win glory by accomplishing something worthwhile. Nobody's going to be impressed if Grambling beats Ruston Junior High. Well, if you're from a small town, you can probably relate to the way that they identify themselves. It's by their families. My parents grew up in a small town in Georgia, and if I went back there, the old-timers there, if they know me at all, would know me not as Professor Hodges of Grambling State University, but as David and Connie's boy. You're known by your family, your people. And that's the way that they identify themselves. So-and-so is my father, so-and-so was my grandfather, and so on. And when they do that, they recognize that their grandfathers were friends. And so they make a private alliance. They're not going to fight each other, and they exchange some of their armor so that they can recognize each other and make their friendship known between them. We then get Book 6, lines 237 and following, a long scene where we see Hector go into Troy, and we see him interact with his brother Paris, with his sister-in-law Helen, with his mother Hecabe, with his wife Andromache, and with their little boy. Why do you think Homer puts this scene in there? Remember that the audience who's hearing this epic being recited or sung, probably more like chanted, already knows the story. They know he's going to die. But this humanizes him. We see him as a man like us, who has family that he loves, and who loves him, and who are going to be devastated when he is killed. And this is unusual in wartime literature. Literature about war often dehumanizes the enemy. They're not Germans, they're Krauts. They're not Japanese, they're Nips. They're not Koreans or Vietnamese, they're Gooks. It makes them easy to hate them, and therefore easy to kill them. Homer goes the other way. He paints Hector as a man like us, and an admirable man in many ways. Um, so that we feel for his loss. And I think it's interesting that of all the warriors in the Iliad, it's Hector, the best of the Trojan warriors, the enemy, that comes off best in Homer's hands. Andromache pleads with him not to fight out in front like he's been doing, because he's going to get killed. The Greeks are going to gang up against you and kill you. And if I lose you, I were better dead. For should you meet your fate, there will be no joy for me, only sorrow. She reminds him of how Achilles has killed her parents and her brothers. So when she says, Hector, you are parent, brother, husband to me, he's not literally all that. What she's saying is, you're the only family I've got. If you get killed, I have nothing. I have no one. Take pity on me now. Stay here on the wall. Don't fight out in the plain outside of Troy. Don't make your son an orphan. Don't make me a widow. And in Hector's response, Book 6, lines 440 to 493, Hector gives us an insight into his character. I too am concerned. You know, Hector is no fool. He has figured out that rule number one of war is that people get dead in war. Okay. I've talked to a number of guys who've been in combat, and one thing they all agree on is that they were all scared shitless. And frankly, if somebody told me he'd been in combat and was not scared, I would wonder if he had anything at all in his head. But if I hid from fighting like a coward, I would be shamed before all the Trojans and their wives in their trailing robes. Nor is it my instinct, since I've striven ever to excel always in the vanguard of the battle, seeking to win great glory for my father and myself. He feels like it's his duty. He has to. And remember, his father, King Priam, is the king. He feels like he has to fight. In the 1980s, Argentina invaded some islands off their coast that were and are owned, they're part of Britain. And the British sent their navy to take them back. Well, one of the helicopter pilots on one of the ships that was being sent out was Prince Andrew, Queen Elizabeth's younger son. And if you think that she pulled some strings to get him off the ship before it sailed, you've been looking too much at American politics. The British have a very different tradition. You see, Elizabeth herself was a mechanic in the British Army in World War II. Her parents, her father King George and her mother, also called Elizabeth, the government during World War II tried to get them to leave London when the Germans were bombing every night, and they flat refused. They felt it was their duty to stay there. That if British citizens were asked to stay in London and go about their jobs every day, jobs that were essential to the functioning of the government and the war effort, the factories and the dockyards, that they owed it to the people to stay there and share those risks. And in fact, when bombs fell on Buckingham Palace, the Queen Mother's response was to famously say, "Now we can look the East End in the face." The East End of London is the dockyard area. It's the poor section of town. It's where the blue-collar workers lived. And what she was saying is, we can say to them, "Hey, we are sharing the risks that you are sharing. We are all in this together." In fact, Queen Elizabeth's father was a lieutenant in the Royal Navy in World War I and commanded a gun turret at the Battle of Jutland. Okay. He could have been blown sky high. There's a long history in Britain of leaders understanding that they have to share the risks that they ask other people to run. My father-in-law landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day during World War II. He was a jeep driver in a mortar battalion. And officers during the Normandy invasion had a white stripe painted up and down on the back of their helmet. Now think about what that says about where officers are expected to be. The only way that the enlisted men could see that white stripe is if the officer was out front. Basically, that was a way of saying, "I'm an officer, follow me." Are there still people like Hector around? People who have this sense of duty? And he's fighting for something else too. Deep in my heart, I know the day is coming when sacred Ilium, another word for Troy, will fall, Priam and his people of the Ashen Spear. But as much as that troubles him and what will happen to his parents, his brothers, he himself, not even that sorrow moves me as does the thought of your grief when some bronze-clad Greek drags you away weeping, robbing you of your freedom. Perhaps in Argos you'll toil at the loom at some other woman's whim, or bear water all unwillingly from some spring. See, if Troy falls, the men and boys will be killed. The women will be taken as slaves. But he says, "May I be dead and the earth piled above me before I hear your cries as they drag you away." You ever heard the expression, "over my dead body"? That's exactly when she's going to be hauled away as a slave, is over his dead body. And we'll close today's lesson with the next scene, where Hector goes to take his young son. But the boy is terrified because he sees this monster with a helmet covering most of its face and this tall horsehair plume, and he screams in fear. And Hector and Andromache laugh, and Hector takes off his helmet, and when he does, then the little boy recognizes him and holds out his arms. "Daddy, Daddy!" Why does Homer put this in here? What is he saying with this scene? Seems to me it's got to have something to do with the contrast between Hector, the gentle family man, and Hector, the fierce warrior. Maybe he's saying that underneath the veneer of the fierce warrior lies a gentle family man. Maybe he's saying that war turns gentle family men into fearsome monsters. You know, I said my father-in-law landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day. He happened to be here with us on the 50th anniversary in 1994. And so we were watching the televised ceremonies of the 50th anniversary together. And when President Clinton and the French president or the British prime minister was talking, when the children's choirs were singing and all that kind of stuff, Dad was his normal self. But whenever they showed the beaches, either film from the invasion or video of the beaches as they look today, Dad got real quiet. And he had this really far away look in his eyes, like he was a million miles away from here. And I knew better than to say anything in those moments, because I knew that he was back on that beach, driving his Jeep past and probably over the bodies and parts of bodies of dead American soldiers wearing exactly the same uniform that he had on. And I could never get him to talk about what he saw on that beach. I could get him to talk about lots of other things, but never that. You really think somebody can do something like that and not be affected? You know, the scars that war leaves on soldiers are not always the scars on the body that you can see. Sometimes they're scars on the heart, the mind, the soul. You think PTSD is a new thing? One of the things I love about Homer is that he is brutally honest about what war does to people. The way he describes the death of warriors on the battlefield still has the power to turn your stomach. He looks both at the glory of war and its brutality. He is honest. Next time we'll be talking about the heroic code and the middle part of the readings from Homer's Iliad.